So, thank you guys for coming. This is an amazing amount of people here for the end of a conference and the last session slot of the day. So, thank you guys very much for coming. So with that said, this is probably going to be my favorite breakout session for VMworld. This was a really fun one to put together. In the US, I've got Scott with me. Over in Europe, I've got Luke with me. And this was really fun to put together, really fun to get some exposure to some other stuff and really go through the learning process. So I hope you guys have some fun with us. So with that, let's get started. Here's our oh, it's not switched. Nope, this one. Yay, there we go. All right, so here's the standard disclaimer slide. I'm sure you guys have seen it plenty, but basically, this is saying, we could talk about futures. We could talk about other things that may impact other things along the product line. Please don't hold us to it, especially don't hold Scott to it. He totally has no meat in or no skin in that game, so, definitely don't yell at Scott too much. So, don't buy stock based upon anything that we're doing, so on and so forth. Oh, don't. Did it before I got the disclaimer in. All right, Scott.
Hello, Scott Driver. Right now I'm the IT manager at a credit union in northern Vermont, but before that, put about 15 years into software companies, which is where PowerCLI entered my life. So I'm excited to be here as well, and hopefully you guys get a lot out of this. If you take some code home, then it's a success for me. So.
All right, and then there's me. So I am Kyle Ruddy. I'm a senior technical marketing engineer with VMware. I focus on the vSphere line and especially around automation. So that's doing things with our APIs, CLIs, and SDKs. However, outside of VMware, I also have a life. So I'm a blogger. I write, my own scripts and things of that nature that I share out on thatcouldbeaproblem.com. I'm also contributing things out there on GitHub. And sharing a bunch of stuff that's out there too. There's some PowerShell stuff, there's some Python stuff, and so forth. Also, highly recommend the vBrown Bag folks. I am one of the hosts with them, and as a matter of fact, we probably have a ton of content today, so there might be a part 2 that's available on vBrown Bag at a later date. And lastly, big fan of Twitter. So if you ever need to reach out and contact me, Twitter is probably one of your best bets.
I think that's probably how we got connected, actually.
That is indeed. So before we get started, I wanted to ask a couple things here. So one, who is here and has never used PowerCLI before? Do we have any of those in the audience? All right. And then one other one. Who is it their first VMworld? Whoa. Oh, that's just difficult. I'm going with the easiest one to get to.
So, like Kyle was saying, there is no marketing material in this. We wrote a bunch of code. For me, a lot of this stuff was how I actually got started writing PowerCLI. So, the entire deck is all code, and we're just going to jump right into it with some of the basics. So, thankfully, Kyle and his team recently, a few months back now, made the switch from PS snap-ins to modules, which is really great. You're going to shame me for this, but I still had PS snap-ins installed the other night at the hackathon.
No, older version, bad touch.
So, but in about 5 minutes, I was able to uninstall, go get the new modules. And it's as simple as, install module, but in this case, because Kyle and his team are frequently, they're going to be more frequently releasing updates, you want to keep the modules updated.
Absolutely. And especially since this is a 201 session, so as we saw by the question of, who here has never touched PowerCLI, that means you guys all probably have PowerCLI already installed. So with that, this is the update process now. There's no going out, finding an MSI installer, no doing any of that mess. It is super simple. It's streamlined. So much, in fact, and it's so important as well, that we put a demo in here. So literally, update module, name, VMware.PowerCLI.
That's all there is to it.
And instead of going out and downloading, a couple, what was it, about 100 or 200 meg, maybe even more than that at one point in time, it only downloads the stuff that's changed. Because that's how we've changed the release cycle there. So we can, hopefully you have been able to check out some of the other PowerCLI sessions where the product manager, Jake Robinson, went into a little more information about that. I can kind of see a question. So there are other options like Save Module that you can then reach out to a system that has internet access, download those modules, and move that within your own environment. And then really, if you want to get pretty advanced there, you can set up your own internal PowerShell repository. It's basically a NuGet gallery. And then you can allow your systems that are inside your air-gapped network to reach out and grab those modules without having to move modules to system to system to system. So there we go. That is the update process. I mean, literally, one-liner. Not even anything fancy, nothing crazy, just straight up. Docker version? No, so that is still something that's under development. That is still a fling. So the question was about the VMware PowerCLI fling that's out there. Currently, that is not a part of this process. It is something that is internally supported. And it runs on PowerShell beta, so that is not something that we support. Today we're only talking about stuff that's supported, but thank you for bringing that up.
The other thing we wanted to cover here, you do have a choice of ISEs. I'm still a fan of the PowerShell ISE with steroids.
Hey.
I know, shame. But Visual Studio Code is great as well. There's a lot of neat features. You can customize the heck out of it.
Yeah, my favorite right now is Visual Studio Code. So personally, I have a Mac. So Visual Studio Code is platform independent. You can run it on Windows, you can run it on Mac OS, and you can get the same experience there. And there's a ton of extensions that are out there and available so that you can include like a PowerShell extension. So that then you can get that IntelliSense and that same kind of experience like you would from the PowerShell ISE. However, Scott is right. One of the really great things that PowerShell ISE still has for it right now is ISE Steroids. Now that is a third-party additional add-on platform or extension, I should say, but it does some really cool stuff. Highly recommend checking it out.
I learned something new in one of the sessions yesterday about Visual Studio Code. You can actually get I think it was an extension where you can do diffs on files. So we're all constantly learning.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of great community resources out there. If you've ever, VMTN's not on there.
Technically it is. It's the last link.
Oh.
It's a much shorter link, much easier to consume because the other one was nasty.
Lots of great resources, lots of great blogs. I spent some time on VMTN trying to beat Luke to posts and always failing. But they showed in one of the sessions yesterday, it's just a really engaged community and lots of folks out there willing and able to help you.
Yep, and so these are some of our favorite resources that are up here. As Scott said, VMTN is a huge one because we love the community. The community really has loved us and fully embraces PowerCLI, so that's fantastic. And then also there's some other areas that are out there like the VMware code samples area. Then you can go out there, you can actually search through some of the examples that users and VMware engineers have provided, as well as the GitHub repository.
I did my first commit yesterday to get this sweet shirt.
Exactly. Fantastic resource. Ever since somebody mentioned it in a session, I've had nothing but a bunch of emails saying, hey, you've got new commits, you've got new pull requests, let's do this. And then another area out there is the PowerCLI blog. It's a fantastic resource. I may be a little biased by that, considering that I do most of the blog posts here lately. But then there's also community stuff.
And you probably recognize a lot of these names. Luke, who's going to be presenting this session in Europe. Is that Alan's the second one? And everybody knows the top V blogger, William. You left yourself off. I ended up at your blog the other day.
It's always scary when you Google something and you find your own blog. But at least I documented that for somebody, and apparently it was me.
All right, so back to the code. Why don't we just kick this one off because it's a little long running. But it is a good community. There's a lot of code out there, but you don't want to trust everything right out of the gate. Trust but verify. So what we're going to see, starting off with setting some environment variables and fire up a browser.
Yep, so we're going to actually go out and grab something from the community repo. In this case, it's the export and import tags functions. So, when you start checking out resources, when you're looking for things to use in your own environments, explore the code, look through it, make sure that it's safe to use. You can do that if it's something that's out there on GitHub, you can open it up in GitHub and read through it. If it's something that you downloaded, which we're about to see here, open it up in your ISE, in your Visual Studio Code or ISE or whatever your favorite platform is.
It's another great way to learn is looking at other people's code, and you usually don't have to recreate the wheel.
Absolutely. Stealing is okay in the automation space. It's almost encouraged. So here what we're looking at, right? I heard something about copyright. Check the license on that. When you're out there in open source, check the license. Verify. Again, trust, but verify. So here we're looking at some functions here, and we're looking for unsafe commandlets or unsafe functions. And when I say unsafe, I mean what happens when you're changing something. So in this case, we see new tag category. So we know that something's going to change. New,
set. These are some of the verbs that you want to look out for.
It might be too late. So we're going to go through and take a look at, we're going to load that script. It was a PS1. So we're going to .source it and bring it in. Or actually, first we did a get command to verify to see if there was anything out there by the same names. So we did a .source, which is a dot, space, and then call that PS1.
What's that do for the folks?
It brings it in and allows you, if it's a function, you can then call it. So and that's what it's doing for get command there. Because now we can see that before, we didn't have those additional functions, but now we do.
Now we're on to the verify phase. So you see there's a copy of the script -whatif, and we're going to scroll on down to where it's actually doing those potentially dangerous actions. And what you can see there on the highlighted line is a what-if statement. What if is just what it sounds like. It's not actually going to execute. You're going to see the output of what the command would actually do. So when we run it, first we import it.
Yep, do our .sourcing again. And then we're going to make use of get command again and do a where object and search through the script block to verify that our what-if statement has been added. So we can now see our import tag function has a what-if statement included as part of it. Scrolling up to hopefully help those in the back see the screen a little bit better.
In this case, we're just getting a tags file where the tags are already formatted in XML. Syntax for what the export tag function is going to do.
And same thing for the import tag. So this is just exploring what's available, looking at what those commands are, or what those functions are looking for.
And here you start seeing the result. Oh, sorry.
Yep, this is using, or that was using the export tag to export all the tags that are in the environment to create that XML file. So this is an example of that XML. Now this was something that was provided by the community. So this is also something that you want to go through and verify. Make sure that this make sure that this makes sense. So if you're familiar with tags, you can probably see some of the things up here, like up atop it was operating system. We have a services tag category that's right there. Apologies for those on that side because I'm using the laser pointer over here. But types of virtual machine, tag right there is SQL Server or SQL, and so forth. So it's just pulling out all the tags that are in that environment. So I think we can conclude that that was safe, that was okay to use.
But going to import, even though we have checked out the file, we still want to check it out. And you see we've run the what if, where it would simulate importing those tags.
Yeah, so here we see a what if, and then this is what this function would do. So what if we create this tag category, and then followed by then we create this tag, kind of laying out the process of what it would do. Now because we're ready to go ahead and actually do some stuff, importing tags, we're going to remove all the tags. And it scrolled a little fast, but we just removed the tags and then removed the tag categories through a loop. And I will say that these will all be available after the session, technically after the session at VMworld Europe. So we've done a get tag category and a get tag. We received no output. So those tags are all gone. Everything that we exported before, they're gone. We do another dot source against our export import tags script. And then we verify that there is no what if statements in what we just imported. And it kind of went a little too fast there, so I apologize. But now we're showing the output from get tag and get tag category. Let me see if I can't pause it. It's about to, I missed it. All right, so the last area that we're going to look at here is the usage of the confirm parameter.
What does confirm do?
Confirm basically says, hey, we're about to make this change. Would you confirm that you indeed want this to happen? And so that's important, especially when you're using those quote-unquote unsafe verbs. So in the script that we went through and modified, it's the should support process that was added to the top of the function. I can cover that here in a second when we actually show this code up on screen for a second. So what are we doing here, Scott?
What are we doing here? We're just looping through the categories and we're getting rid of them, and you see there what the variable for confirm preference is set to high. So when we hit confirm, you get this safe but potentially annoying pop-up asking if you really want to do the destructive action.
So, and this is the usage with, the confirm parameter. So it's, you are telling the system, you are telling PowerShell that we want, every time you're about to modify something, please confirm it with us. That's if that should support process function is there. And then lastly, we're removing all the tags again. We're cleaning up the environment. We've assured that we still have our XML file. And we're going to do our import and use verbose.
Well, and before that, up on line 36, we see confirm is set to false. So you can, once you're comfortable with what the action is doing, you can just have it rip.
Yep, you can get rid of those annoying messages saying confirm, 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 confirm. You can use confirm and then pass it to false. And then if you run it in verbose mode, it prints out, kind of sort of like the what if output. So here we can see that there was a new tag category. It started, it stopped, it started, it stopped, and then moved to the tags. So based off of that, we can pretty much guesstimate that there were two tag categories created and probably, 8 new tags.
So like we covered before, you want to watch out for some of those potentially unsafe verbs, the ones that are going to be making changes to your environment. If you're going to, a really safe place to start if you're just getting going on PowerCLI is using gets. If you're going to do some gets, you're pulling data back, maybe for reporting, maybe we'll show some reporting.
Environment discovery.
And if you want to be safe, what if and confirm are your friends. If you want to be double secret safe, you can combine them.
And then lastly, run it in a test environment. And if you don't have a test environment, check out the hands-on labs. They're free, you can use it remotely, and last time I checked, you can copy and paste stuff into it. So write your script on your local system, copy paste it into the hands-on labs, and run it.
I may have had to use that when my lab at home fried getting ready for this. There is a dedicated PowerCLI HOL, but if you go into most any of them, I can't think of any HOL I've ever done that didn't have PowerShell in there. So that's kind of how you get started with getting community resources, making sure they're safe. So we're going to dive right into getting some stuff done. Hopefully everybody's using templates and OS specs. So in our first example, we're going to go through how you can use those to loop through and create some machines. I see a lot of people starting with this. It's, an easy way to start immediately getting value out of PowerCLI. Clicking through the GUI, time intensive, even just going through the GUI to set OS specs, which will help save you time. You can do it even more efficiently via the command line.
And so to help automate the process, when you're starting to build out your environments, deploying these VMs, as Scott said, making use of templates, making use of the guest OS customizations. So for that reason, you're going to want to get familiar with these get, new, and set OS customization specs and OS customization NIC mappings. And then, how would you deploy? Even though you're using templates, even though you're using these guest customizations, what can you do to make your life even further easier?
Well, since we know that hopefully all commandlets have the verb noun context, we could probably use something like new VM. Sounds reasonable enough.
Absolutely.
And then as we go along, you can see there's kind of a progression to these examples. We start off with getting it done, and we're going to clean up the code a little bit, and then we're going to make it even more efficient by putting inputs into those examples.
So again, jumping to our demo environment here, and if you're wondering, Start Demo, that's just something that's created and released into the community, and it relies on, or doesn't make me have to type stuff in. So here, we're setting our credentials for our domain credentials. This is, so your VM can join to Active Directory.
Then we jump right into creating a new OS spec using that credential, as well as making Pat G responsible for this machine. And then this is something I actually learned doing this, is that you can create a temporary OS spec. So if you're going to be if you want to get granular with your network mappings, you can go through, and in this case, we just did a simple for loop to iterate through and set an IP address. So that temporary OS spec is just valid for the life of the session. I don't think you actually even see it in the UI if you go looking for it.
Nope. CLI only here. And then, so here's something that we'll actually be focusing on here as well. You see our usage, our calling of get OS customization NIC mapping, and then piping that into a set. So taking information from our get and sending it to our set so that we can change some things on it. However, this is, I don't know what you guys think, but this is kind of unreadable. This is really hard to read. I mean, just being honest.
That's fair. So how do we clean it up?
This is how most people start. This is really easy because you can use and interact with the parameters directly. And
Tab complete is your friend.
Absolutely. Tab complete is definitely your friend. So is finding the cursor. There we go. So we're going to go through this loop here that we set up. It's going to create two systems. And it's making use of the counter to also assign the IP address as well as the name. So for counter 1, we see that we have an IP address that ends in 10 and then that counter number. Then we can see we created a VM. It again uses that counter. So it's win application 01. Then we can see the usage of our counter again in the second one, assigning an IP address of 102. So then we have our two Windows systems that are there created. We've got our OS customization spec that has been assigned to it. And I've lost my mouse again. There it is.
But in this next example, you can see the code becomes quite a bit more readable.
So this is something that's called splatting. This is something that if you were in the Power Hour yesterday, Luke also showed off there. But this makes it a whole lot easier to read. So, when you're passing this to other folks that are within your organization or you're sharing it out on the community, this is way more user-friendly, more readable, easier to interact with.
Basically, you're creating a hash table of the parameter and the attribute, and then you just pass in the entire splat to the command, and it interprets it.
And one of the fun things that I got to learn is that you have to specify the splat input with the @ symbol. If you try and do a $ like it's a variable, it's definitely going to break, and then Luke's going to yell at you. I may know that from personal experience.
I don't know what you mean.
Oh, I think I hit it twice. Nope, there it goes. Okay.
So same idea. We're just looping through and creating those VMs, but this time we're using the prettier code. The one thing that you don't get with the splatting is you actually have to know the parameters that you're using. So your tab complete goes away. But like Kyle was saying, you start with run the command, figure out your various elements, and then you move on to using splatting.
Yep, so this is just the same process that we did before, using the same loop, but changing our counter there to be number 3. So we can see again, we're getting the same output as before. Now there's one other way that we can do this that's a little more custom.
Yes, so I used to work in a web shop, and developers really wanted a lot of their Linux machines, and they wanted to be able to define them. So in this last example, we're just taking input from a JSON file where we define those parameters, and we pass it into a server variable. So you can see there, we've defined the name, the destination cluster, and the resources that they need. Once again, we take that splatting concept, and we take the elements from the servers, which originated in the JSON, and we pass it into our new VM. So in this example, the JSON is actually bigger than the code we're using.
And this is a really good usage of it so that you can pass it, custom settings. So in this case, we've got one system that has 1 CPU, 8 gigs of RAM. The other one has 2 CPUs and 96 gigs of RAM. This is probably not something that you want to run in your own environment, but, developers ask for fun stuff. So and then I'm not certain if the decks are going to be actually released outside of VMworld, or if it's just going to be the recordings. But if the deck is available, we did include also the scripts as part of the deck, so that you can kind of browse these, see what we did, see how they can work in your own environment.
Make it work for you. And you said that after Europe, they're going up on the GitHub?
Yep, these
Excellent.
will be posted publicly, for stealing or otherwise usage. So now that we have some of our VMs, what did most people do next? What's the next steps?
Go to the VMworld party?
Hey, I have enjoyed my fair share of VMworld parties this year.
Maybe we want to set them up so that we don't have an HA conflict.
Sounds like a good idea. And how would you do that?
The GUI.
Oh.
Don't we have to use the GUI for DRS?
I think you get kicked off stage by saying just GUI as a whole.
I'm guessing you guys gave us some commandlets where we can go and set up DRS via the command line. Again.
So after you've deployed your VMs, if they're going to be running the same services, you probably want to create some DRS rules to do affinity or anti-affinity rules, depending on your environment. PowerCLI has that available as well. And in that case, you're going to want to get familiar with the get, new, set, and remove DRS rule commandlets. However, with one of the newer versions of PowerCLI, we've also extended what's possible with DRS and its capabilities.
And we have the same get, set, new for removing the elements as well.
Yep, so we can do this around the VM and host groupings. And we definitely have a demo of that as well. So starting off, we're going to do a get cluster. We're going to store that into a variable because we're going to need to recall that variable at a later time, probably several times. So let's make it easy on ourselves.
That variable, that's just a string, right?
Well, in this case, it's an object. We're passing it the entire cluster object.
So there's attributes and methods associated with that?
Absolutely. So for this, we're also going to go through and after that completes, let me pause it. There we go. So once we have our cluster variable, we're going to try and spin up a couple new variables that's referencing our Windows systems and our Linux systems so that we can then create DRS rules based upon those.
And in this case, we're just creating a simple anti-affinity rule to keep the VMs on different hosts.
So we're making use of new DRS rule, giving it our cluster again, giving it a name. In this case, remember if you've got spaces in there, you're going to want to give it some kind of quotations to make sure that it reads it properly. And then there's the parameter for keep together. You use false for anti-affinity, true for affinity rules. And then you specify your VMs in the VM parameter. So as we can see with the first one, we see our new rule that's come up. There we go. Then we've done the same thing for our next rule for the Linux VMs, but I put it out to null because I don't want that output on the screen. I don't want it confusing anybody. Then we make use of get DRS rule so that we can then see our DRS rules. So we can see that there are now two DRS rules that have been created in the environment that we just created.
We should probably make use of those, I would guess, and give them to some VMs. So in this case, we're going to do evens and odds. We set the virtual machines to an even VM variable and the hosts to an even VMH that we will use.
Yep, so this is the start of creating our VM groups and our host groups. So the idea behind this, and this will change by your environment, so use your best judgment, but we're going to put our even VMs on our even hosts and our odd VMs on our odd hosts. And we're doing that by putting those systems by name into even VM variable, or same thing with the hosts.
And again, we're making use of the pipeline, taking the object and passing it into new.
I'm not having good luck with the cursor. But okay, so it rolled all up to the top. So then what we've done is we've taken use of our cluster variable again, and we're creating new DRS cluster groups. So we're using new DRS cluster group. So we're giving it a name, we're putting our even VMs into the grouping that's named even VM group. And then doing the same thing for the odd systems. Then we can view our DRS cluster groups by get DRS cluster group. Then spits out all of that information so that we can see that our even VMs contain only evens. Our odd VM groups only contain odds. And then making use of new DRS VM host rule to then create the actual rules that go along with that. So segmenting out and making sure that the even VMs run on the even hosts. And then I made use of the out null commandlet again to make sure that we don't, put unnecessary information on the screen. Then we use get DRS VM host rule to verify that those rules are enabled, they are set to the way that we wanted to, and they are enabled.
Voila.
All just like that. So again, with the deck, or with the scripts that we release after VMworld, you've got the code there for both of those.
And I don't know about the PDF, but the session will be recorded and available after Europe, I believe.
So Scott, now that these VMs are created, they've been separated, the DRS configuration is set up properly, what could come next after, some time spent with those, after a couple months?
Looking like the memory consumption might be a little warm, so got to fine-tune the environment, give it some more resources. Maybe we gave it too much CPU, so we can use the commandlets to take that away as well. So one thing to keep in mind when you're modifying the VMs is the VM tool state and the power state. So in this next example, we have a loop that will do just that. Just like with the new VMs, get and set VM. In this case, we're going to make use of the shutdown VM to power off machines that don't have hot add enabled.
And that's the case where you need to know, are your systems running VMware tools? Are they, because this is going to do a graceful shutdown. Because we don't want to just, yank the plug with stop VM. So we're going to try and use the VMware tools to help us out and make this a little more graceful.
Our friend start demo. Oh, ugly code again.
It's back. But it's functional.
It is totally functional, and there is no right or wrong if you get it done. That's one of the key things. So it's scrolling by already, but what we did at the beginning was check to see what the power state was, if hot add was enabled. And then we set a little sleep timer to let the machine shut down after we issue the shutdown VM guest. And as you can see, at the very start of each example, we get the resources, then we wait, and we set the resources, and you can see we've taken away a CPU and bumped up the memory.
So, and then here's a little bit better look at the code since it went by pretty quickly. So we're seeing up top, we see the for each. It's taking a look at get VM, where object, which means that we're getting back all our VMs, and then searching through them, looking for something specific. And in this case, we're looking for the name parameter, or name value, contains application. So this is like our Win application servers that we created earlier. We're modifying those. At that point, it's taking each server, each iteration of that, the servers that it's pulled back, and going through this loop. And the loop starts off by doing an if statement to check for CPU hot add whether or not that's enabled, or if that is not enabled, is the VM powered off? Or rather powered on, I should say. If it is powered on, we issue that shutdown VM guest, and then we do a start sleep commandlet just to wait for the guest OS to actually shut down, give it time. The other good thing to call out in here, it didn't make it into what's copied onto here because it would take up too much space. But, so when you create your object and you save that into a variable, so say our app server, that is a point in time. So it's getting that information at the point in time when the VM is on. So when you're going through and you're checking to see whether or not the VM is powered off, you need to refresh what that object looks like.
You need to be mindful of the state, not just of the object, but of the state of your script.
Correct. Because if you continue to go back and check or wait for the VM to show that it's shut down, if you never update your variable, it's never going to look like it's shut down because you never update the values for that variable. And then it finishes at the end with a set VM, just specifying the parameters for num CPU, setting that to 2, and setting the memory in gigabytes to 8. And again, making use of confirm false because this is a loop. This is something that's automated. This is something that we don't really want to interact with. As you could see from the output before, we did want to see the before and after, but we didn't want to click yes every single time for every single modification.
This is a pretty simple example. We're just looping through a couple of machines, but once you start operating at scale, some of these confirm things are going to start hindering you. So once you're comfortable with what you're doing, like Kyle said, we can set the confirmation to false.
Okay, but so they've kept using them, and they've kept using them. There's more data that's accruing.
Those IIS logs.
They're a beast. So what happens
to my favorite.
So what happens to your, what happens if you need to expand the disk space on it?
Well,
I mean, can I just change the VMDK and we're good to go?
I would say, it's pretty simple to do that, but how are we going to manage the OS? Luckily, the kind folks on the PowerCLI team gave us invoke VM script, which I'll get on my soapbox for a minute. This is my favorite commandlet. And what it allows you to do is leverage VM tools on the guest machine to run scripts in the context of the VM. So very powerful, but I'll warn you, you need to be paying attention to your roles and who has access to what. Because if you can run a script locally, the security implications are pretty clear with that one. So in this example, we're going to go and get our VM and assign it to a variable and set a bunch of variables that we're going to use in a moment. To start off, we use the invoke VM script to get the elements back out of the OS. So this is not coming from vCenter, this is not coming from the VM, this is coming from Windows.
I lost my cursor again. Anyway, so moving forward, so that is basically issuing a PowerShell commandlet to pull back what the local PS drive looks like. Then we're setting additional information for the variables, such as we want to modify hard disk 1, which is going to be the C drive. Now, we care about the C drive, there we go, which unfortunately it actually already passed through changing it. And there we go, come on. There we go.
But what we're going to do now is we're going to create a script which we're going to run in the guest VM to do your standard Windows operations. So in this case, we are just going to be using disk partitioning and extending the disk and output, we're building the file and then we're going to run it. You can get really powerful with how you can build these elements. I gave a example the other day of we use this to build a script locally, then call it via invoke VM script. It becomes inception for PowerShell.
So we've gone through, we've created what the local commands are going to look like. What you would issue if you were local on that system, if you opened up the console and you're interacting directly with it. So now that we have that script block, we're going to make usage of the invoke VM script, just as Scott was saying. Oh, it disappeared on me before it.
So in this case, we're running a batch script. You can also run PowerShell, and if you've got Linux systems as bash, you have options.
Yeah, so this just isn't a Windows thing. You've got, it didn't push play. Yes, so for that, it's not something that works natively, like you can't use the question was, can you specify it to use Python? And the answer to that is you can use something natively on the system to call the Python, to call your resource, but you're going to do it through bash. So you're going to have to issue a bash command to then run that natively. So, the same thing, even if you were using any other programming language, on, say, a Windows box or even with Python, you're going to have to call that resource through either something like PowerShell or a batch file. So possible, but it's not like a native function. It's not a native feature.
And will open VM tools work with that or not? I'm assuming no.
Correct. Yes. So the question is, does this work with OpenVM tools? And to the best of my knowledge, it does not. That sounds like a good feature request for a website that was released yesterday.
I'm pretty sure it does.
I heard it does. All right, so again, power of the community. Community says yes, so I let them answer for me. Because there's a good chance they know better than I do.
You're not running in a peak guest, or is it?
Yes, as long as you're not running an antique guest OS. And that's antique from Luke, not from me.
In the back here? No,
Nope,
in the black shirt.
If you're concerned about security, I actually used it to go ahead and join it up to salt stack. So once it's in salt stack, it works whatever you want.
Interesting. See, now we have additional use cases. So there's, that's kind of what Scott was doing, getting up on his soapbox, because there's a lot of power behind this. Once you can call something natively on the guest OS, then that really opens up the door to a lot of possibilities.
So we got one over here as well.
Oh, I cannot see in the lights, so I apologize. Yes, you can pass credentials. So there is a guest OS username, guest OS password, guest OS credential. So you can pass any of those, and I believe there's also a host user password and credentials for that as well, if you can pass the host credentials.
You can pass credentials within the context of the script, but again, this goes back to the security elements. You need to be careful with what you're doing.
All right, so push play so that we can actually show that this works. So it's taking our script block and it's running it locally. So we see exactly what the output would be if you opened up, a command prompt on the guest OS and ran through the disk-part configuration.
It actually returns that as an object. So if you store that in a variable, for example, you can start doing other checking against it, if you will.
And then just, showing off that we did in fact do this, and this isn't just us doing black magic and making the command line print whatever we want it to. We do another get PS drive against our C drive, and we can show that it went from 20-some gigabytes free to now at over 87 gigabytes free.
I can't talk enough about invoke VM script. You can get really creative really quickly, automate pretty much anything. There again is just the code that we used. It's all live coded. As you see, it's not black magic, it all works.
Okay, so what happens if what happens if the PowerCLI didn't create a commandlet for you to use?
You didn't create a commandlet for that? I don't know. Maybe there's something where you can look under the covers, look at views of things.
Absolutely. So what happens if there isn't a commandlet available for what you're trying to do? PowerCLI can make full use of the public APIs that are running for vSphere. So, if there's a commandlet that's not available, and in this case we have a request from somebody in management, and we're being asked to enable the storage IOC, or input-output control statistics collection for a specific data store. Now there isn't like a, get hard disk, or it'd be get data store, and then, SIOC statistics collection false or true. So you have to go through and you have to research a little bit to be able to make this call. You have to get familiar with a couple things. Like Scott was saying, get view is one of those.
Get view. So the commandlets are high-level functions, but get view is where you can get under the covers and start accessing all of the attributes.
All of the methods, all of the API methods that are there and existing underneath the covers. Everything that the UI calls. So to kind of get familiar with this stuff, if you've never used GetView, it is what we call low level, makes access to the low level stuff through PowerCLI. So you're going to have to get familiar with some of the documentation that's out there for the APIs. And if you don't maybe not have access directly to that, getMember is going to be your friend. So getMember is going to spit out the parameters that are possible. They're going to spit out the methods that are also possible, as well as some other information that's available through PowerShell. The other thing to go along with this is creating a specification, or what's known as a spec, like we saw with the guest OS customization spec. In that case, you're going to be creating new PowerShell objects through the new object commandlet.
So if this is a 201 course, I would say GetView is the 205. It can be a little daunting, but it is powerful. So like Kyle said, you have to get used to the documentation.
So we've got our request. we've been asked to enable the SIOC statistics going on there. So we're going to grab our data store. We're going to store that in a variable because, again, we're going to need to reference that again. We can use the extension data, which also pulls from the API, to look at extension data IORM configuration. This is where getMember comes into play, and I did not show that off in the demo here, so I will explain it. So getMember is telling us that these other areas are available for us to call and pull out objects that are based upon that high-level object. In which case, we're really only concerned about the stats collection being enabled or not. So we use select or select object to pull out that specific area.
Then we move on to getting the lower level elements with getView, and we assign that to an object as well, where we can start building out the spec.
So in the specification is going to have some objects that are already available in it, or some properties that are already available in it. That's where the stats collection enabled comes into play. So if we called the spec by itself, we would see all the options that are available as part of that specification. But to keep this kind of condensed time-wise, we didn't do that. But okay, we're at the end, so there we go. So our API method, the method that we're actually calling itself, is this configure data store IORM _ task. Now, if you've been to any of the sessions this week and you've heard about the REST API calls, this is not that. This is rough. This is, there's a learning curve that goes along with this. That's why the documentation comes into play. And then, as part of that, as part of the exploring the documentation, it tells you what you need to specify to make that task happen. So in this case, we need the moref for the data store. So you can't just pass it that data store variable. You have to specify the moref, because that's what the API call is looking for. And then you also have to pass it the specification that you created earlier. So then once we've done that, once we've made our call, once we've performed our call, we're going to want to refresh our variable, our object for the data store, like what we kind of mentioned earlier. In this case, I just called it by use the ID parameter because I don't want it to go through and search by name. ID was a little faster, so we went with that. And then recalling the extension data.iorm configuration, and specifically looking at the stacks collection being enabled or not. And we can see that now it's true. So this is something where we were able to gain an automated foot up that we could then use to do this across several different data stores in a repeated function or capacity, and allow others to do it as well. And this is the example of the script. All right, so since we are running very, very close on time here, and we still have a bunch more examples, I'm going to skip through this one. So we also have an example of creating an alarm in vCenter. That's a pretty good one. It was something that was sourced from the community, so if you need it like today, you can go out there and grab it. Now, one of the other things that's really important about doing any automated tasks or using PowerCLI is reporting.
Have to know how well your environment's running. This can also be a really safe way to start getting comfortable with the commandlets. If you're getting data, well, I wouldn't say you can't ever harm the environment, but it's generally safer than doing something like a remove.
So in this case, we've been asked to create kind of like a performance report where we're being asked for the VM name, we're being asked for the OS type, and some other areas about the performance of the VM, like the memory, CPU, and the disk space being used. So we're going to combine this with some PowerShell functionalities. So, once we get back that information, we can perform calculations and things of that nature. So we have to get familiar with getStat, measure object, and just overall the formatting of the way that PowerShell handles numbers. So let's dive into the demo here. So we're going to create an array here because for each system, we're going to want to spit out what's returned into an array. So that's going to be the my call up there at the top. Oop, went right into the to the loop. That's fine. So this is the loop, kind of going through, point out a couple things. So we're creating this server info variable and specifying things like the vname, the OS mem, average memory in essence. And then we're calling out the servers as part of the loop and calling out stuff like the name, what the guest OS type is, what the VM host name is, the memory, and then we're using some PowerShell formatting, number formatting, to properly orient the output. And then at the end of the loop, it spits out a CSV. So once you have the CSV, you can take that and put that into whatever your choice of, however you want to consume the information.
It's a poor man's capacity planning report.
That's true as well. However, it's highly customized, so it's exactly what you want with no extra fluff.
That looks a little prettier.
All right, so this is the loop, and since we have 4 minutes left, so I'll just go through this and not go through any of the other stuff. So actually here, I'll do it over here since you guys have not had access to the pointer. To the benefit of the pointer, I should say. So we're using things like get date. So we're pulling out information from a certain period of time. So in this case, we're using add days and specifying -30. Now that's a little counterintuitive from what you would normally think. That's in essence saying go back 30 days. And then doing finish, we're going to use the current date. To fulfill what's in our loop, we're only grabbing out VMs from a certain cluster. So we're doing get cluster, get VM. So we limit the VMs that have been returned by what's in the cluster. And we're doing our for loop. So for each one of the VMs that's in that object servers, we're pulling out one server and going through it. If it does not have an OS full name, which in essence means that VMware Tools is not running, that means we're probably not going to get the rest of the stats, so we're going to ignore it.
In this case, we're just interested in the Windows machines.
Yep.
So if we pass that criteria, we jump right into the stat collection. That's what you see there with the get stats, passing in the server object and the specific statistics that we're interested in over our time frame that we defined at the top.
And then we're specifying an empty variable with the double quotes right there. However, adding properties for it of the vname, the OS, what I explained earlier. And then we're going through and we're actually populating those properties for the object, for the variable, I should say, with things like the server.name, guest OS full name, and then down there towards the bottom is where it starts going through some of the statistics and handling the formatting.
That's where we're using the measure object to get the statistics and do some basic mathematical functions. And what you see following the -F is the actual element that's being measured and formatted by curly brackets 0 and 2. We do that for a little bit, and then in the end, we pump this server info object back into the array that we created at the beginning, and we keep looping through. Finally, ending up with export CSV to make our pretty little capacity report.
All right, so with that, I think we're at a minute, so we probably don't even have time for questions, but I certainly appreciate you guys coming.
We'll find a way to continue this topic because there's a lot more data that we have for you, so thanks for coming, really appreciate it.